The sound of the gavel was like a nail in a coffin. In the opulent, wood-panelled courtroom, Judge Harding looked down with weary eyes, ready to dissolve a marriage and sign off on a billion-dollar separation. Arthur Vance, the billionaire titan, smirked at his wife, Elena. He'd painted her as a gold digger, a footnote in his story, and he was seconds away from erasing her. His lawyers were sharks, and she was bleeding. The judge cleared his throat. With no further evidence, but Elena stood. "Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "Mr. Vance and his counsel have forgotten one crucial document." She reached into a simple briefcase. The judge was ready to sign the divorce, until the billionaire's wife pulled out a prenup with his signature. The air in family courtroom 3B was thick and stale, smelling of old wood polish and quiet desperation. It was a sterile, beige room designed to dissect messy lives with cold precision. On one side sat Arthur Vance, a man who looked less like he was attending a divorce hearing and more like he was posing for the cover of Forbes. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford, a deep charcoal grey that probably cost more than the average car. Beside him, his legal team, led by the infamous Marcus Thorne, was a wall of smug, expensive confidence. They shuffled papers, clicked pens, and occasionally whispered to their client, who would nod, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips. On the other side sat Elena Vance, looking like a ghost haunting her own life. She wore a simple navy blue dress, neat but unremarkable. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her face was pale, devoid of makeup. She looked small. Beside her sat Clara Bennett, a young lawyer whose briefcase looked like it was made of more vinyl than leather. To the casual observer, and to Arthur Vance, this was not a fair fight. It was an execution. Judge Lawrence Harding presided. He was a man in his late 60s, with a face etched by thousands of anemic afternoons, just like this one. He'd seen billionaires, paupers, actors, and con artists. He was, by all measures, impossible to shock. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Harding said, his voice a low gravel, "you have presented a compelling, if rather one-sided, argument for the division of assets. Your claim is that Mrs. Vance was a non-contributing partner to the marital estate?" Marcus Thorne, a man whose silver hair and shark-like smile had dismantled dynasties, stood up. "Precisely, Your Honor. Mr. Vance built his empire, Vance Dynamics, from the ground up through his own genius and relentless effort. Mrs. Vance, well, she attended charities. She decorated their homes. She was, by all accounts, a supportive, traditional wife. But a partner in the business? Absolutely not. She contributed nothing to the $14 billion valuation we are discussing." He gestured to a mountain of binders. "We have sworn affidavits from the entire board, including the COO, Ms. Serafina Dubois. We have financial records. Mrs. Vance's name is on no founding documents, no patents, no corporate charters." Arthur leaned back, steepled his fingers, and looked at Eleanor. His eyes were cold, triumphant. He was finally getting rid of the dead weight. "Mrs. Vance," Arthur had told her just 2 months prior in their cavernous, sterile kitchen, "is a relic of a life I've outgrown. You don't fit the new branding, Eleanor." Now in court, Judge Harding turned his gaze to Eleanor's side. "Miss Bennett, your response?" Clara Bennett stood. She was young, barely 30, and she looked nervous. She adjusted her glasses. "Your Honor, we dispute the categorization. Elena Vance was more than just a decorator." Thorne scoffed, loud enough for the court reporter to hear. "She was my client's emotional rock," Clara continued, her voice wavering slightly. "She was there before the billions. Before the— Feelings are not financial assets, counsel, Judge Harding interrupted, his patience clearly wearing thin. Do you have any documents? Any proof of contribution? Or are we just talking about emotional rocks? Arthur Vance chuckled softly. This was it. The humiliation was complete. Clara Bennett looked down at her notes, shuffled them, and then looked at Eleanor. Eleanor gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Your Honor, Clara said, her voice suddenly finding a new, firmer register. We have spent 3 days listening to Mr. Thorne paint my client as a leech, as a simple, ornamental wife who hit the lottery by marrying a genius. A description she has yet to refute with evidence, Thorne snapped. Mr. Thorne, you will sit, the judge commanded. He looked back at Clara. Counselor, I am losing my patience. The court's time is valuable. You have 5 minutes to present any new, relevant evidence, or I will be forced to rule on the motion to divide assets as per Mr. Thorne's petition, which, I will note, offers your client a one-time lump sum of $5 million for time served, so to speak, and vacating the premises. 5 million. It sounded like a lot, but it was 0.03% of their estate. It was an insult. It was garbage. Thank you, Your Honor, Clara said. I have no further evidence to present at this time. A murmur went through the small gallery. Arthur's smile widened. He'd won. However, Clara continued, my client, Mrs. Elena Vance, wishes to make a personal statement. Thorne shot to his feet. Objection. This is a hearing, not a theatre. A personal statement is not evidence. Mr. Thorne, it is highly irregular, Judge Harding said, but given the totality of the circumstances, I will allow it. But be warned, Mrs. Vance, he said, looking at her directly for the first time. A speech about your feelings will not change this court's mind. Do you understand? Elena Vance stood up. The room seemed to hold its breath. She was no longer the small, pale ghost. As she walked to the podium, her steps were measured, silent. She looked, for the first time, not at the judge, but directly at her husband. Arthur, she said. Her voice didn't shake. It was cold, clear, and carried the acoustics of the room perfectly. Arthur's smile faltered. This was not the crying, broken woman he had expected. You've built a very impressive story here, she continued. Arthur Vance, the lone wolf, the genius, the man who built an empire from nothing. Your Honor, this is a— Thorne began. Shut up, Marcus, Arthur hissed, his eyes locked on Eleanor. He was intrigued. He wanted to hear her beg. You've told the court, your board and Ms. Dubois that I was just the wife, that I brought nothing to the table. You seem to, in your genius, have forgotten how this all began. Your Honor, Clara Bennett interrupted. My client's statement is, in fact, the preface to introducing one final piece of evidence, which we had withheld until Mr. Thorne's entire case was on the record. We believe it is a matter of rebuttal. Judge Harding's eyes narrowed. Withheld? Counselor, you are bordering on— It's a document, Your Honor, Elena said, cutting him off. Her hand went to the simple, worn leather briefcase at her feet. The one that looked cheap next to the Italian leather of Arthur's team. She clicked the latches. A document Mr. Vance himself signed. Arthur laughed. A single, sharp, arrogant bark. What have you got, Elena? A restaurant bill? A birthday card? A fake? A forgery? Elena's hand emerged from the briefcase. She was holding a single, folded sheaf of papers. They were yellowed at the edges. I believe, Elena said, walking toward the judge's bench. You'll find the signature quite genuine. This is ambush, Thorne roared. This is procedural misconduct. What is this document, Mrs. Vance? Judge Harding demanded, his voice now sharp with interest. Elena placed the papers on the bench. It's our prenuptial agreement, Your Honor. The courtroom fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. Arthur Vance's face went white. He stared at the papers. What? That's not possible. We never had a prenup. Oh, yes, we did, Arthur, Elena said, turning to him. You just didn't read it. You were too busy telling me how brilliant you were. Judge Harding picked up the document. He put on his reading glasses. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. His eyebrows climbed his forehead. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, his voice suddenly electric. You might want to take a look at this. And you, Mr. Vance. It seems your wife's contribution was everything. To understand the document, you had to understand the night of October 14th, 2008. Arthur Vance was not a billionaire then. He wasn't even a millionaire. He was a 24-year-old postgraduate student with a failing startup, a mountain of debt, and an ego that wrote checks his talent couldn't cash. He had the salesman's charm, but his product, a clunky social media aggregator, was a dud. Elena Rostova was the opposite. She was a doctoral candidate in computational linguistics, a quiet, brilliant girl from a working-class family who spent her nights not at parties, but in the university's computer lab, fueled by lukewarm tea and a single, burning idea. They met in the university library. He was loudly pitching his failing company to a potential investor on his phone. She was 3 tables over, trying to debug a line of code that would change the world. Hey, she finally said, after he'd hung up with a string of curses. You're loud. Arthur, accustomed to charming his way out of everything, turned on the smile. Sorry. Trying to save the world, one terrible pitch at a time. I'm Arthur. Elena. She turned back to her screen. He was intrigued. She was the first person in months who hadn't been immediately dazzled by his bluster. He sat down. What are you working on? Looks complicated. It is, she said. It's a predictive language model. I'm trying to teach a machine not just to understand language, but to anticipate user intent based on behavioral patterns. Right now, it's just a mess of code, but I think it could change how people find information. It could predict what you need before you even know you need it. Arthur didn't understand the science. Not really. But he understood the pitch. He saw in that instant not a quiet girl in a faded hoodie, but a rocket. He wasn't a genius, but he knew how to spot one. And he knew how to use one. He spent the next 6 months wooing her. He didn't woo her with flowers. He wooed her with interest. He brought her coffee in the lab. He listened. He asked what he thought were smart questions. He packaged her genius in his ambition. Elena, this Project Chimera, as you call it, it's not a dissertation. It's a company. It's the company, he told her, his eyes blazing. You have the engine. I can build the car. Together, we can take over the world. She was hesitant. She was an academic. She wanted to publish, not profit. But he was relentless. He was charming. And she had to admit, she was falling for him. He made her feel seen, not as a nerd, but as a visionary. One night in his tiny, damp apartment, surrounded by empty pizza boxes, he made his move. We have to protect it, Elena, he said. This idea, it's worth billions. Before we show it to anyone, we have to lock it down. What do you mean? I mean, let's get married. She was stunned. Married? Arthur, we've been dating for 6 months. And they've been the 6 best months of my life, he said, taking her hands. But I'm also a businessman. We're partners. If we get married, we're a legal unit. What's yours is mine. What's mine is yours. It protects the idea. It protects us." Elena, despite her brilliance with code, was naive about people. She was in love. She said yes. A week before the simple courthouse wedding, she came to him. "Arthur," she said, holding a few sheets of paper. "You're right. We should protect the idea. I had my uncle. He's a paralegal. Help me draft something." Arthur was on the phone, trying to secure a seed funding meeting. "What is it? More legal crap?" It's a prenuptial agreement," she said, her voice small. It just says that Project Chimera is mine, my intellectual property, and that I'm licensing it to our new company. It makes it clean." Arthur barely looked up. He was already practicing his pitch to investors. In his mind, he was the company. Her idea was just the raw material. Yeah, smart, Lena, whatever you say," he said, taking the pen and papers. "You're the brains, I'm the face. Now, where do I sign?" He scrawled his name, Arthur R. Vance, at the bottom of the last page without reading a single word of the first. He was signing away an empire he hadn't even built yet. He didn't see the clauses her uncle had cleverly inserted. He didn't see the one that said, "In the event of a legal dissolution of the marriage, the licensing agreement for Project Chimera is immediately terminated, and all intellectual property, derivatives and profits therefrom revert in their entirety to Elena Rostova-Vance." He just saw a signature line standing between him and his first billion. He signed it, kissed her on the forehead, and went back to his phone calls. "You're a genius, Lena," he said, patting the document. "Now let's go get rich." Eleanor quietly took the papers, made 2 copies, and had them notarized the next morning. She put one in a safe deposit box. The other she kept in the bottom of her briefcase for 12 years. The first 5 years were a blur. Vance Dynamics exploded. Elena's algorithm, which Arthur had rebranded as the Vance Predictive Engine, was a miracle. It transformed online advertising, then logistics, then financial markets. Arthur, with his slick hair, sharp suits, and flawless media training, became the face of a tech revolution. He was the Vance in Vance Dynamics. Elena, meanwhile, stayed where she was comfortable, in the lab. She was the chief innovation officer, though her name was never in the press releases. She led the team of coders, constantly refining Chimera, building new iterations, and keeping the company a decade ahead of its competitors. She worked 18-hour days, fueled by the same passion she'd had in college. She didn't care about the fame. She cared about the work. Arthur cared about the fame, and the money, and the power. The man who had once brought her coffee in the lab was now a man who flew to Davos, who had models on his arm at product launches, which he called networking, and who had started to believe his own press. He wasn't the man who knew how to use genius. In his mind, he was the genius. He started to see Elena not as his partner, but as a high-level employee. An employee who was, frankly, a bit of an embarrassment. She didn't dress the part. She didn't schmooze. She hated the galas, the yacht parties, the empty, glittering life he had built around them. "Elena, darling, you have to try," he'd sigh, fixing his cufflinks before another black tie event she was dreading. "These people are our partners. They don't want to talk about neural network optimization. They want to talk about art, skiing, money." "Then you go, Arthur," she'd say, nursing a cup of tea. "I have a new build to test." His resentment festered. He felt shackled to the quiet, brilliant woman who was, he knew in his darkest heart, the real reason for his success. He hated her for it. Then, 2 years ago, came Serafina Dubois. Serafina was everything Elena was not. She was a Harvard MBA with a background in hostile takeovers, a razor-sharp mind for marketing, and the predatory grace of a panther. Arthur hired her as his new chief operating officer. Serafina didn't just understand the branding, she was the branding. She was sleek, ruthless, and she adored Arthur. Or at least, she adored his power. She saw Elena immediately for what she was, the true center of power at Vance Dynamics, and therefore a threat. Serafina began a quiet, corporate war. She restructured departments, moving Elena's core team of loyal coders to different projects. She rerouted Elena's reports, forcing them to go through her. She began translating Elena's technical briefs for the board, slowly taking credit for the innovations. Elena is a pure academic, Serafina told the board, her voice dripping with faux respect. She is the heart of our R&D, but she doesn't have the scalable vision for where we're going. I'll be taking her Project Chimera and productizing it for the new global market. Arthur, by then already deep in an affair with Serafina, let it all happen. It was perfect. He was sidelining his wife, installing his mistress, and consolidating his own stolen legacy. The final betrayal wasn't in the bedroom. It was in the boardroom. Eleanor was called into Arthur's office, a vast glass box overlooking the city. Serafina was there, sitting not in a guest chair, but behind the small conference table, as if it were her office. "Elena," Arthur started, not meeting her eyes, "we're making some changes, a new direction. We're grateful for all your foundational work." "Foundational work," Elena repeated, her blood running cold. "Vance Dynamics is moving past the R&D phase," Serafina cut in, her voice smooth as glass. "We're a global logistics and market maker now. The board and Arthur feel that your role as CIO is redundant." "Redundant?" Elena looked at Arthur. "My lab is the entire company, Arthur. Project Chimera is the company." "No, Elena," Arthur said, finally looking at her. His eyes were dead. "I am the company, the brand, the vision. You're a coder. We're promoting you. You'll be given a new title, Chief Research Fellow, a lifetime stipend. You can tinker, write papers, whatever it is you do. But you will no longer be an officer of this company. Serafina is taking over all product divisions, effective immediately." It was a public execution. He was exiling her, stealing her life's work and handing it to his mistress. Elena just stared at him. The man she had loved, the man she had built this world for, was a stranger, a thief. "I see," she said, her voice quiet. "We'll have security escort you," Serafina said, picking up her phone. "That won't be necessary," Elena said. She turned and walked out of the office, past the glass walls, past the employees who wouldn't meet her eyes. She went to her own office, which was already being packed into boxes. She picked up her purse and her old leather briefcase. She didn't go home to their sterile mansion. She went to a small, unassuming law office in a strip mall. The sign read, "Clara Bennett, Eskimos, Family Law." Clara was the daughter of her old college roommate. She was young, hungry, and had just passed the bar. "Clara," Elena said, sitting down, "I'm going to be divorcing my husband. It's going to be complicated." "Mrs. Vance, Elena, Arthur Vance, the billionaire. I'm not sure I'm equipped." Elena reached into her briefcase and pulled out a yellowed, notarized document. She pushed it across the desk. "You are," Elena said, "because we aren't going to fight over the houses. We're going to take the entire company." Clara Bennett read the document. Her eyes went wide. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He really signed this." "He did," Elena said. "Now here's the plan. We let him file first. We let him get arrogant. We let him and his lawyers build their entire case on the lie that I did nothing. We let them commit to it, on the record. We let them perjure themselves. And then we show them this. It's brutal, Elena, Clara said, a slow smile spreading across her face. He taught me how to be a businessman, Clara, Elena replied, her voice turning to steel. He just forgot to teach me how to lose. The divorce proceedings were a 3-day public crucifixion. Arthur and Marcus Thorne had designed it that way. They didn't just want to win. They wanted to annihilate Elena's reputation. It was a corporate strategy as much as a legal one. If Elena Vance was publicly proven to be a nobody, a glorified housewife, then there would be no shareholder questions when she was erased from the company's history. Marcus Thorne was a master of 1,000 cuts. Mrs. Vance, he'd asked on day 1, during her deposition, can you please point to your name on the articles of incorporation for Vance Dynamics? It's not there, Elena answered quietly. No? How about the patent for the Vance predictive engine? Is your name on that? No. Arthur filed it as sole inventor. Sole inventor. Thank you. And in the last 5 years, how many board meetings have you attended, Mrs. Vance? None. I wasn't invited. Not invited. And yet, you are seeking 50% of this $14 billion company, a company whose board you never met, whose patents you didn't sign, whose incorporation you weren't present for. Tell me, what did you do, precisely? I led the R&D team, Elena said. I wrote the original code. You wrote code, Thorne mocked. You were a programmer, an employee, a very well-compensated employee, I might add, by virtue of being married to the CEO. But a partner, the claim is absurd. Day 2 was worse. Thorne called Serafina Dubois to the stand. Serafina was flawless. She was articulate, empathetic, and utterly deadly. She was the perfect picture of a competent, powerful female executive. Ms. Dubois, Thorne began, you are the current COO of Vance Dynamics. Tell me about Elena Vance's role at the company when you arrived. Elena is a lovely woman, Serafina said, folding her hands. Truly. But she was in over her head. The company had outgrown her skill set. She was a lab person, not a business leader. She was a bottleneck. Arthur, in his loyalty, had kept her in a position she couldn't handle for years. So in your professional opinion, did Mrs. Vance contribute to the growth and valuation of Vance Dynamics? No. Not in any meaningful business sense. Her original work was, as I understand it, a good starting point. But the real value, the global scaling, the market integration, the billion-dollar contracts, that was all Arthur. And I like to think, my team. Thank you, Ms. Dubois. No further questions. Clara Bennett stood up for her cross-examination. This was the moment. The courtroom watched, expecting the young lawyer to be torn apart. Clara looked flustered, shuffling her papers. This was all part of the act Elena and she had rehearsed. Ms. Dubois, you said you liked to think your team did the work? Clara stammered. Yes, we did. And you work closely with Mr. Vance? I am the COO. I work with the CEO every day, yes. How closely? Clara asked, as if she were fishing. Thorne jumped up. Objection. Relevance? This is a financial hearing, not a gossip column. Sustained, Judge Harding grumbled. Clara backed off, seemingly intimidated. Right. So, Ms. Dubois, have you ever seen the original source code for Project Chimera? Serafina's eyes flashed, just for a second. Of course, it's an archaic piece of programming, but yes. And you understand it? The computational linguistics behind it? I'm not a coder, Serafina said dismissively. I'm a strategist. I don't need to know how to build a watch to know how to sell it. So you just sell Mrs. Vance's work? I sell Vance Dynamics products, Serafina corrected, her smile tight. All IP is owned by the corporation. Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor. Clara sat down, looking defeated. Arthur Vance put a comforting hand on Serafina's back as she passed. It was intimate, and it was meant to be. A final, public humiliation. By the end of day 3, Judge Harding looked like he was ready to end it. We have heard 3 days of testimony, the judge said, his voice flat. The evidence presented by Mr. Thorne is overwhelming. The evidence presented by Miss Bennet is sentimental. He looked at Elena's side. Miss Bennet, you have filed a motion for a 50% split based on integral contribution. I have seen not one shred of paper, not one email, not one anything that substantiates this claim. All I have is the testimony of the company's COO that your client was, quote, a bottleneck. I am therefore ready to sign the divorce decree based on Mr. Thorne's proposed settlement. This was the moment. Your Honor, Clara said, standing up, her voice suddenly clear and strong, all pretense of nervousness gone. Before you do, we call Elena Vance for a personal statement and to enter one final item into evidence as rebuttal to Ms. Dubois and Mr. Vance's claims. This was the lead-in to the climax. Thorne objected. The judge allowed it, and Elena Vance stood up, walked to the podium, and pulled the yellowed papers from her briefcase. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with the sound of a closing case, fell into a deep, shocked silence. What is this? Judge Harding asked again, holding the document. It's a prenuptial agreement, Your Honor, Elena said. This is impossible, Arthur shouted, finally finding his voice. He stood up so fast his chair screeched. We never had a prenup. I would know. You would if you'd read it, Elena said calmly. Marcus Thorne snatched the document from the judge's clerk. His face, usually a mask of smug control, was rapidly turning ashen. He read the first page. He flipped to the last page. His eyes darted to the signature, Arthur R. Vance, then to the notary stamp, dated October 15th, 2008. This is a forgery, Thorne stammered. But the confidence was gone. He knew a real notary stamp when he saw one. My client has the original notarized copy, of course, Clara Bennet said, as well as the copy filed with the county clerk's office 12 years ago. It is perfectly legal and binding. But what does it say? Arthur demanded, yanking the papers from his own lawyer's hand. He started to read. Judge Harding looked at Eleanor. Mrs. Vance, perhaps you can enlighten the court. Mr. Thorne has built his entire case on your lack of contribution. What does this document say? Elena looked at Arthur, whose face was draining of all color, his hands visibly shaking as he read. It says 2 things, Your Honor, Elena said. Arthur and I were young. I was a scientist, and he was a businessman, so we agreed to keep our assets separate. Thorne let out a choked laugh. Separate? His assets are $14 billion. What did you have? Student loans? I had Project Chimera, Elena said. The blood drained from Thorne's face. Clause 1, Elena recited from memory, states that all premarital assets of Arthur R. Vance, consisting of his failed startup, agro-social, and student debt, remain his, and all premarital assets of Elena Rostova, consisting of her intellectual property, Project Chimera, an algorithmic predictive language model, remain hers. No, Arthur whispered. No, no, no. Clause 2, Elena continued, her voice gaining power, is a licensing agreement. It states that I, Elena Rostova, agree to license Project Chimera to a new joint entity, Vance Dynamics, for a period of 12 years, or for the duration of the marriage, whichever is longer. Judge Harding was now leaning forward, his entire body rigid with attention. Go on, Mrs. Vance. And clause 3, the most important one. It states that in the event of a legal dissolution of the marriage, the licensing agreement for Project Chimera is immediately and irrevocably terminated. Silence. Not a cough. Not a breath. What? What does that mean? The judge asked, though his expression said he already knew. It means, Clara Bennett said, stepping forward, that as of your signature on this divorce decree, Your Honor, Vance Dynamics loses the legal right to use its core technology. The Vance Predictive Engine, the entire basis of the company's $14 billion valuation, reverts to my client. Arthur Vance made a sound, a strangled, guttural gasp. She can't, he stammered, looking around wildly. She can't just... Take it. I'm not taking anything, Arthur, Elena said, her voice laced with ice. I'm just taking back what was always mine. The company, the name, the brand, the buildings, the jets. That's all yours. You can keep it. But the engine, the product, the only thing of value, that's mine. This is theft, Arthur roared, lunging toward her. A bailiff blocked his path. Mr. Vance, sit down, Judge Harding bellowed. He looked at Marcus Thorne. Mr. Thorne, did you know about this? Thorne was non-functional. He was staring at the paper, his career flashing before his eyes. He had just spent 3 days committing his client to a story, under oath, that this document proved was a lie. He had allowed his client and his star witness, Serafina Dubois, to perjure themselves. Your Honor, Thorne whispered, this document, it's unconscionable. It's fraud. It's a contract, Mr. Thorne, Judge Harding snapped, signed by your client, a contract you, as his lawyer, clearly never bothered to ask him about. You built your entire case on a foundation of sand. You claimed Mrs. Vance contributed nothing, when in fact she contributed everything. You claimed she was a bottleneck, when she was the source. The judge threw the prenup down on his desk. He looked at Arthur Vance, his eyes burning with a cold fury. Mr. Vance, you and your counsel have, in a spectacular, almost biblical fashion, argued your way out of an empire. You came in here to strip your wife of her dignity. You have, instead, stripped your own company of its core asset. He looked at Serafina Dubois, who was trying to slip out of the courtroom. Ms. Dubois, sit down. You may have criminal exposure for perjury. Serafina froze, pale as a sheet. The judge turned back to Arthur. You want the divorce? Fine. You want to pay her a lump sum of $5 million? Fine. He grabbed his gavel. I am signing the divorce decree as requested by the petitioner, Arthur Vance. Bang. The marriage is dissolved, and per the now executed Clause 3 of the prenuptial agreement, the licensing agreement between Elena Vance and Vance Dynamics is hereby terminated. He looked at Elena. Mrs. Vance, you are now a free woman, and it appears you are the sole owner of the most valuable algorithm in the world. As for you, Mr. Vance, you are the CEO of a $14 billion company that, as of, he checked his watch, 11:34 a.m., no longer has a product to sell. The aftermath was not a slow crumble. It was an implosion. The moment the gavel fell, the journalist in the back row was already on his phone, filing the story. By the time Arthur Vance stumbled out of the courtroom, his $5,000 suit looking like a Halloween costume, the first alerts were hitting phones worldwide. Vance Dynamics billionaire loses entire company in divorce. The prenup that destroyed an empire. Who is Elena Vance? Vance Dynamics stock halted as core IP reverts to ex-wife. Arthur didn't speak. He pushed through a sudden swarm of cameras, his face a mask of purple rage and disbelief. Marcus Thorne was right behind him, already fielding a call from the board, his voice a panicked squeak. Serafina Dubois had been detained by the bailiff for a conversation with the judge about her testimony. Elena and Clara, however, were in no rush. They gathered their papers slowly. Elena adjusted her simple bun in the reflection of the courtroom window. "Are you okay?" Clara asked her. "I am," Elena said, and she was surprised to find that she was. The fear, the anger, the years of quiet humiliation, it had all evaporated with the strike of the gavel. All that was left was a quiet, cold calm. "What's next?" Clara asked. "Now," Elena said, clicking her briefcase shut. "We build." While Arthur was locked in a screaming match with his lawyers, Elena and Clara were in a war room they had pre-booked at a nearby hotel. Within an hour, Elena, as the sole owner of Project Chimera, had a new legal team, with Clara as lead counsel, filing injunctions. A cease and desist order was delivered to Vance Dynamics headquarters, legally barring them from using, accessing, or selling any product related to the Vance predictive engine. The stock, when it was allowed to resume trading, bottomed out. It fell 98% in a single day. The $14 billion valuation was gone. The company was nothing but a name, some servers, and a lot of empty, expensive real estate. Arthur Vance, the Titan, was left holding an empty shell. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting, and in a unanimous vote that took less than 5 minutes, fired Arthur Vance for gross negligence and fraudulent misrepresentation to the board. He was escorted from the building he had put his name on, carrying a single cardboard box of his effects. Serafina Dubois was fired for cause and was facing a criminal investigation for perjury. It was a total, complete, and surgical dismantling. 2 weeks later, the business world was rocked by another announcement. A new company, Chimera Applied Sciences, had just been formed. Its founder and CEO was Elena Vance. Its first acquisition was a portfolio of distressed assets, namely the servers, offices, and employee contracts from the now bankrupt Vance Dynamics, which she bought for pennies on the dollar. She rehired her original R&D team, the ones Arthur and Serafina had scattered. She promoted the loyal ones, and she sat down in the CEO's chair, her chair in her building, and got back to work. She didn't change the name on the building. She kept it. She wanted every person who entered to remember what happened when Arthur Vance forgot who the real Vance in Vance Dynamics was. 6 months later, the name Vance meant something entirely different in the financial world. It was no longer a synonym for arrogant, cutthroat success. It was a parable. Vance Dynamics, the corporate husk Arthur had been left with, was a dead thing. It declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy a mere 48 days after the divorce, its name so toxic that no investor would touch it. The only bidder for its assets, the servers, the patents Arthur had filed under his own name, the towering glass building, was a newly formed entity that purchased them all for 10 cents on the dollar. That entity was Chimera Applied Sciences. Its founder and CEO was Eleanor Vance. The atmosphere inside the building, now stripped of the cold, pretentious art and the looming portraits of Arthur, was electric. The glass-walled offices were now open-plan collaboration spaces. The executive floor, once a silent, carpeted tomb of fear, was loud with debate and discovery. Whiteboards, covered in complex equations and flowcharts, had replaced the Italian marble. Elena had rehired her entire original team. The brilliant coders and engineers Arthur and Serafina had scattered and had given them shares, autonomy, and a mission. She was not a CEO in the way Arthur had been. She didn't rule from a throne. She was in the labs, a coffee mug in one hand, a stylus in the other, arguing with her top engineers over a line of code. She ate in the cafeteria. She knew the names of the janitors, and the company, free from the bloat of Arthur's vanity projects and Serafina's parasitic marketing divisions, was thriving. Project Chimera was more than just a predictive engine for ad sales. Elena was now applying it to medicine, logistics, and even climate science. Chimera Applied Sciences was valued at $8 billion after its first quarter earnings call, and analysts predicted it would triple that within 2 years. The Forbes cover, when it came, was inevitable. But it wasn't the shot Arthur would have demanded. He always posed like a conqueror, feet planted, chin up, staring down the lens as if daring the world to challenge him. Eleanor's cover was a candid shot, taken by a photojournalist who had spent a week at the company. She was in the main lab, her hair in its simple bun, sleeves rolled up. She was laughing at something one of her junior coders had said, her face lit by the glow of a holographic data model. The headline was simple and devastating. The Architect, How Elena Vance Built and Rebuilt the Future. Clara Bennett, now General Counsel and COO of Chimera, walked into Elena's office, the same vast corner office Arthur had once occupied, and dropped the magazine on the desk. "This is going to drive him insane," Clara said, a grim smile on her face. She was no longer the nervous, fumbling junior lawyer. She wore her new power with the same quiet confidence as Eleanor. "He did that to himself," Eleanor said, not looking up from a diagnostic screen. "Any word from the SEC on Serafina?" "They offered her a deal," Clara said, sipping her tea. "She's going to plead guilty to 2 counts of perjury and 1 count of wire fraud. She'll serve 18 months, minimal security. In exchange, she's turning over all of Arthur's personal servers. She kept copies of everything. It seems she was planning her own betrayal before you beat her to it." "Poetic," Elena murmured. She finally looked up, a small, tired smile on her face. "And him?" Clara's expression hardened. "Arthur, he's a ghost. The shareholder lawsuits are going to strip him of the last of that $5 million. He's a pariah, Elena. No one will hire him. No one will even have lunch with him. He's the man who lost $14 billion because he wouldn't read a piece of paper." Arthur Vance was, in fact, at lunch. He was sitting at Le Ciel Étoilé, a 3 Michelin star temple of cuisine, where he had once entertained senators and Silicon Valley royalty. His private table, the one in the alcove with the city view, was occupied by a loud, laughing group of tech founders in their 20s. The maitre d', a man named Jean-Pierre, who had known Arthur for a decade, had seated him at a small, awkward table near the clatter of the service door. It was a calculated, mortal insult. Arthur was living in a sterile, rented condo in a faceless glass tower, paid for monthly from his dwindling legal fund. The $5 million was almost gone. Marcus Thorne, in a desperate attempt to save his own reputation, was charging him astronomical fees to defend him in the dozens of civil suits. He looked like a man unraveling. His suit, once a custom Tom Ford, was now a year old, slightly too large for his frame, and wrinkled. His hair was thinning, and his eyes had a desperate, haunted look. He had come to Le Ciel as a pilgrimage, a desperate attempt to feel something of his old life, to prove to himself that he was still Arthur Vance. He'd ordered a $200 bottle of Bordeaux he couldn't afford. He nursed it, watching the table of young founders. One of them, a kid who had once pitched him for seed money, looked over, recognized him, and quickly looked away, whispering to his friends. The table went quiet, and then the whispers and snickers began. They were all watching him. The man who had it all. The Icarus of Wall Street. Arthur's face burned. He finished his wine, his hand shaking, and signaled for the check. "Put it on the corporate account," he snapped at the young waiter. "Vance Dynamics." The waiter, a man in his early 20s who had been reading about Arthur on his phone all week, looked pained. "Sir, the Vance Dynamics account was closed 6 months ago." "What? That's impossible," Arthur blustered, his voice rising. "I am Arthur Vance. Run it again." "Sir, I can't," the waiter said, his voice dropping. People were now openly staring. "The account? It doesn't exist. It was frozen, and all funds were, well, they were transferred to Chimera Applied Sciences to settle outstanding debts." The blood drained from Arthur's face. She had taken it. Even this tiny last vestige of his power, she had scrubbed clean. "Fine," he hissed, fumbling for his personal wallet. He pulled it out. It was a thin, worn piece of leather, not the proud, overstuffed alligator wallet he used to carry. He opened it. Inside were $200 bills and a debit card. His hand trembled as he pulled out the cash. He threw both bills onto the table, covering the $1,500 check. "Keep it," he spat, trying to salvage one last shred of dignity. "Sir," the waiter said, his face now a mask of pity. The wine alone was... This isn't enough. It was the final, devastating humiliation. Arthur Vance, the billionaire, couldn't cover his lunch. He stared at the bill, then at the cash, his mind simply unable to process the math. He was broken. He threw his debit card on the table. "Just run that. Whatever." He didn't wait for the receipt. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly, and walked, almost ran, from the dining room. He didn't wait for his coat. He pushed past Jean-Pierre, who looked at him with cold disdain, and stumbled out onto the street. The cold November air hit him like a slap. He was a king with no kingdom, a genius with no ideas, and a rich man with no money. He was, finally, nothing. At that exact moment, miles away, in the office that had once been his, Elena Vance was on a video call with a team in Kyoto. They weren't discussing ad revenue. They were fine-tuning a new application for Project Chimera, an algorithm designed to model tectonic plate stress, capable of predicting major earthquakes with 72-hour accuracy. It was a humanitarian project she was funding herself. Clara came in, not with a legal document, but with 2 steaming mugs of tea, just as she had in their college lab days. She set one on Eleanor's desk. "You saw the news about Arthur?" Clara asked quietly. Eleanor looked up from her screen, her eyes clear and focused. "Which news?" she asked genuinely. There was so much of it. The lawsuits, the SEC investigation, the foreclosure on his Hamptons estate. The restaurant. Le Ciel Étoilé. "He couldn't pay his bill. It's all over. Page 6. Elena took a slow sip of her tea. She looked out the window at the city she now helped to power. She didn't feel joy, or pity, or even anger. All she felt was a profound, quiet finality. A chapter, closed and locked. "He spent his entire life building a brand, Clara," Elena said, turning back to her screen. "He just forgot to build a foundation." She clicked a key, and on her monitor, a new string of code lit up, a new world of possibility opening before her. "He built his own cage," she said, her voice soft. "I just stopped letting him use my key." Arthur had wanted to be a king. Elena was content to be a builder. And in the end, everyone got to live in the world they had made. They say karma isn't real, but this story feels like it. It's a powerful, real-life reminder that the loudest person in the room is often just the emptiest. Arthur Vance built his entire world on a lie, believing his own hype and forgetting the one person who made it all possible. He thought he was a king, but he was just a man living in a castle built and owned by his queen. He was so busy trying to take her 50% that he lost his 100%. What did you think of Elena's ultimate plan? Was it cold-blooded, or was it perfect justice? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. This story took a long time to put together, so if you enjoyed this drama, please show your support by hitting that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story of truth, lies, and the moment it all comes crashing down. Thank you for listening.